I am Helle Kaasik. I have studied some physics, some psychology and religious studies at University of Tartu in Estonia. But my special interest is chemical composition of ayahuasca, and this is what I am talking about today. I didn't do this work all alone. In this phase of the work, we have a nice international team. Leo Lahti is also here from this team. So, first, thanks for everybody who gave me some money, samples, or other support that I needed in this work. This was the Brazilian team in University of Campinas, the Institute of Chemistry under guidance of Alessandra Sussolini, where I learned this work and where the first phase of this work was performed. Nice team. And those are the constituents of ayahuasca: 2 Amazonian plants, Pinus stereopsis capi and Psychotria viridis, the most widespread and traditional plant components of this wonderful spiritual medicine. And what's wonderful about this brew tea or concoction is if you make tea from one of those plants, it's not so much psychedelic, but if you put them together, you can experience whatever you can imagine and much, much more. So the psychedelic effect comes from their interaction in human body. Behind that interaction are some known molecules. It's an interesting biochemistry. Harmine, harmaline, tetrahydroharmine, and the visionary compound dimethyltryptamines that actually doesn't find itself the defining component of ayahuasca, but the leaves that are added to this. Ayahuasca is used in indigenous Amazonian traditions for healing and divination. It has become a new tradition of new spirituality, worldwide practice of healing, spiritual retreats, tourist business, and it's also used in Brazilian syncretic religions as a sacrament. There is some individual, therapeutic, or psychonautic use, and this is a place to confess that I'm also a member of one of those ayahuasca drinking religions from Brazil, namely Santo Daime. I found it in Netherlands in 2011. It's a weird thing, but it has been good for me, who is a weirdo also. There was a tradition in Amazon to add different plants to ayahuasca. There are more than 100 plants that are known to be added to modify the effects, to learn about those plants. And there is also a new tradition in this new diaspora of ayahuasca using to substitute the traditional constituent plants with other plants, like Peganum harmala gets substituted for the wine. Mimosa or acacia species get substituted for the DMT component because they are easier to obtain and easier to brew here in Europe. It's called analogues of ayahuasca or anahuasca. I don't like the term because huasca means wine and sometimes there is no wine. And there is also a version of pharmahuasca when they use extracted or synthesized chemicals like a pharmaceutical antidepressant, Moclobemide, psychonaut cocktails. So how it began from me, I was doing my fieldwork on religious studies in cooking of the sacrament Santo Daime, ritual called feitio, in Brazil, near the mouth of Amazonas, more near to the cooking place or feitio house. Men were doing all the hard work, boiling the sacrament, pounding the wine. Women were cleaning and picking the leaves. And then the sacrament was made during the week, working in connection with the sacrament available for all the participants all the time on the altar of the forest church. And as a scientist, I wondered how come from the two big piles of plant material, the jagubi and rainia leaves, 6 or 7 different types of the sacrament are being made, all different in their appearance, taste, and effect, both quantitatively in terms of general strength, but also qualitatively. And the leaders of the ceremonies, padrinos, madrinas, know in which types of ceremonies called works, trabalhos, in which phase of the work, which sacrament is being used in which dosages. So this is not a random variation, this is an art and science. So I got interested in what's behind of that in chemical sense, what is the material nature of this variety of those spiritual medicines and sacraments. So I got to collect some samples, more than hundreds of them, with help of my good friends of Santo Daime and other kinds of ayahuasca from different traditions, from different parts of the world, and got to analyze them to learn this analytical work in the University of Campinas. But this was the net heaven, the best time in my life. I felt I'm doing what I was made to do. The chemical article was for the second wave of that research. In this presentation, I will also talk about unpublished data. The samples were collected from Netherlands. In this work, I had professional chemists to do the analysis, so I didn't have to do and pay everything by myself. But the methods in principle remain the same: high performance liquid chromatography plus tandem mass spectrometry. And the main 4 components, DMT, tetrahydroharmine, harmine, and harmaline, we measured their concentrations in the brews. In first wave of that study, we found out that yes, indeed, the different degrees of the sacrament or the kinds in Santo Daime have indeed different concentrations and also different ratios of the concentrations of these main bio and psychoactive compounds. Who were in this conference a year ago might remember this. Leo was talking about my work. He was supposed to talk about open data and open science. And he had a question, why is not this strongest concentrate of the Santo Daime sacrament called gel, not in the graph? It is because I got samples of diluted versions of it that is actually used in work. It becomes diluted by different ratios. Some churches do it 3 parts of water for 1 part of a gel. Some do it 5 to 1, and it's not always very exactly measured, so it cannot be compared directly because this is like divided by unknown constant, cannot be directly compared to those other undiluted degrees. Better now? Okay. So in terms of ratios of active compounds, we found out that in different traditions they are indeed different. If we divide concentration of DMT to concentration of harmine and put it against concentration of tetrahydroharmine to harmine, and denote different traditions like shamanic or indigenous, we see that there is a nice balance between this ratio of DMT, the visionary compound of the brew, and tetrahydroharmine, that is the afterglow, firmness, courage component of the brew. Like in cannabis, there are different compounds that balance each other in its effect. So it came out that there is also some balance or correlation between different compounds in ayahuasca. So those indigenous samples were like perfectly on one line. The Santo Daime samples, the blue grosses here, were around the same line, and this scatter is not random. This is the systematic differences between the different degrees used in different works and different phases, if possible. But in the so-called neoshamanic or Western ceremonies, we observed the big scatter, outflyers towards higher proportion of DMT. I will come back to this. Sometimes it's from Mimosa, the components with high proportion of DMT, but it also gives different character to this brew. And we also found some samples that were high above of that graph, somewhere high above the roof of that building. They didn't fit to this graph because there were very little harmine in them. Two related samples that were actually from Finland, the worst samples I ever got. There was actually no vine and no leaf, no traditional components of ayahuasca at all, so they should not be called ayahuasca if there is no active amount of banistereoscopic alkaloids, but they were psychoactive. I was in that ceremony. What they had was high DMT from Mimosa, confirmed by presence of uremamine, a specific molecule present in that plant. It had Moclobemide, a pharmaceutical antidepressant instead of the vine, and somehow tryptamine. First we were thinking it was psilocin because we didn't have a standard later, and got it reanalyzed in Tallinn, and it came out it was bufotenine. How it appeared there and what was added, was it frogs, was it Vilka or Sebil, I don't know what was, but one should not call this psychonaut cocktail ayahuasca and tell people before ceremony that now we are meeting Amazonian sacred plants and their sacred spirit, and how do you behave when you meet those sacred spirits of Moclobemide, sorry. One should not do such things. If you do experiments on humans, then you should have informed consent on what they will drink, and you should compensate them, not collect big money from them and tell it's ayahuasca. So there is some ethical problem with that. But this business does not operate in Finland anymore, as far as I know. And probably as a result of those results being published and getting known. Usually I try to be confidential about my results, but this time I let know the local organizer about what was in the brew. So in this new phase of study, we have more analytes. We'll look also for metabolites and more additives in the brew. And we collect more data, not only for which country and in which cultural context it was brewed, but also which plant ingredients went into this, how long was it boiled for, storage, dosage, physical state of the sample, was it liquid brew or solid concentrate, and the component status. In some ceremonies, people drink first one component, the monoamine oxidase component that is usually made of Peganum harmala. Then after 20-30 minutes, the DMT component is administered, and only then the journey will start. If the arrangement of the ceremony is like that, this is a certain sign that it's not a traditional brew. So we collected more samples, more data, actually more than 200 samples altogether, but there's this sub-sample collected from Netherlands, 36 samples of liquid ayahuasca, both components in one brew that could be compared with each other. And what we found was a very large variability. We see that the standard deviations are almost the same in some cases, for some substances, even larger than the mean. And the differences between the minimal and maximal concentrations are not a couple of times, but it's 10 and 20 or 40 times. The distributions were very wide. For DMT, the main psychoactive components started from 100 with something, finished with 4,000 or more. And again, we saw that in those Western or neoshamanic brews, the average concentration or ratio of DMT to harmine was higher than in Santo Daime brews or in indigenous brews. So seems to be pretty robust result. When we take concentration of DMT divide to all harmala alkaloids in it, in indigenous samples, the maximum was about half. In Santo Daime samples, it was about the same, depending on degrees. But those Western or neoshamanic samples were like 2 times more DMT than all the harmalas, or even 3 times more. So the results were pretty similar to the previous results for the samples collected from all over the world. Now it was different samples collected only from Netherlands, collected by different people from different circles, analyzed by professional chemists, not me. And we see again a bunch of samples flying towards the higher proportion of DMT. We can guess in which context it was in those new samples. Many examples that had outliers towards higher and even more high than before concentration of DMT. So neoshamanic ceremonies really like the trip component. So the new data showed widespread use of analog untraditional 2-component brews, that first you drink one component, then you drink another, and they cannot mix them because there will be a chemical, physical interaction between them. No analogues were used in Santo Daime because it's brewed in Brazil and makes no sense to substitute with other plants. In 2 samples, we found low concentration of 5-MeO-DMT. One of them was stored for many years. Another had made with chaliponga, the yahe plant, Diploterus cabrerana, instead of chacruna. And it has been published before that 5-MeO-DMT can be found in trace amounts in these plants. And now one unexpected new results. We found in many samples low concentrations of bufotenine and psilocin, and they were correlated to each other and correlated to DMT. They are chemically very similar molecules. Are they produced from DMT in plants during boiling, during preparation of the sample, or are they somehow misinterpreted? I need ideas about how do they appear there. The concentration of bufotenine and psilocin were pretty low, too low to have an individual effect, but in this combination with harmala alkaloids, it could, in principle, affect the character of the experience. So this is a brand new result. We don't really know how to interpret this, so we are waiting for input. So in conclusion, we recommend for ayahuasca users and practitioners openness, awareness, and communications about what is in the brew. It's not don't ask, don't tell. It is ask and tell. Be brave to ask which components, which plants I am going to put in my body, which plant spirits I'm going to meet in this ceremony. Be brave to ask before you decide to go to this ceremony. And let's give a message to ceremony organizers that this is nothing bad. This is not distrust of the medicine or something, but because there was that Helle who told that bad brews are out there, or fake brews with antidepressants. Now I want to be aware what I will put into my body, which plant spirits I am going to meet in this ceremony. So we see a need for ethical self-regulation among practitioners. To be honest, what we give, if we call it medicine, in our conventional drugstore, they tell us what is in it and how much is in it. If it's a medicine, let's have the same respect for this spiritual medicine also. We need evidence-based legal regulation, so it stops to be a thing in underground for high risk, high gain entrepreneurs to make quick money with giving people whatever psychonaut cocktails and calling it ayahuasca. We need affordable and reliable testing services, so practitioners can know what is in their brew, because sometimes they don't know. And we need open data sharing about what should be in traditional and analog brews. If you have more questions, if you want to read my work, I'm always ready to share and communicate. I could talk until tomorrow morning, but now my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helle, for sharing these fascinating results, also some unpublished work here. I'm sure we have some questions and comments from the audience.
Thank you for doing this important work. So I was wondering, could you say something, let's say the indigenous ayahuasca and compare it, or the average Santo Daime ayahuasca, and compare it to the average neoshamanic Western ayahuasca. Could you tell us a bit how you would, what kind of psychopharmacological differences you would expect? Perhaps, I mean, you mentioned meeting different plant spirits, obviously, but maybe apart from that?
I actually did not collect data on specific experiences. It would be perfect if we could correlate those concentrations of different analytes to the experience, but I didn't collect the data on experience. What we can speculate is that the slight spread towards higher DMT in Santo Daime could be because in Santo Daime it's mainly for the spiritual connection, while in indigenous traditions there is a big part of the physical healing work, cleansing work. But this high spread towards high DMT, like 3 times more DMT than harmine, this could make for a more psychedelic experience. And also when this, with repeated dosing, it means it can make things a bit unstable. If you take just a little bit more, and due to this achieve the necessary enzyme inhibition, the high DMT will hit you as a big wave. So you drink just a little bit more so the beauty will not end so soon. And you got hit by a big wave. Some people have experienced it with the brews of Jurema, and you get more than you asked for.
Thank you. Fascinating talk, really very cool findings and data. I was mostly curious about where your samples were coming from. Could you just talk a little bit more? I'm especially curious about the indigenous/shamanic samples, but also more generally where the Daime samples are coming from and where these neo-shamanic communities were practicing.
Indigenous samples were mostly from Hunikuin people in Acre, between Brazil and Peru. There were some from Colombia and one from Ecuador. Among new samples, they are not here, but we have them. Santo Daime samples were from Brazil and from many countries in Europe, Estonia, Finland, Netherlands, Czech Republic, a couple of more. There is Santodyne in almost all countries of Europe. And neoshamanic samples were also from Europe. Mostly, yes. One Santodyne was from US, made in Hawaii. So in this old part of work, this was like all over the world. This new part of the world, all samples were collected from Netherlands.
Okay, thank you for the lecture and the work. Really pioneering. Two parts. The first related to the effects of the different proportions of the different components. I noticed you're cooperating with Benjamin Mudge, and if I recall correctly, he was some years ago talking about how the difference between how much harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine there is effects like how stimulating, or because he was researching the ayahuasca use of people with bipolar.
Yes, bipolar.
And, do you know if he's continued with that work?
Yes, he's continuing this work, a big part. He collected many samples and got them analyzed inside of the same project. We had some agreements to make before I use data from his samples in this. And I guess he will talk about a connection with bipolar. But as far as I understood from his research, is that certain types of brews are not good for bipolar people. Bipolar disorder has been an exclusion criteria in many clinical trials, but he was trying to get to clarity that there are some kinds of brews that are not good for bipolar people, but there are some that are good. And this bipolar work he will talk about. And the data were analyzed in this project. We have the data already, but it is his task to connect this to bipolar thing.
And the rationale would be that some brews with high proportions of one of those would more easily push people into manic episodes, right?
Could be, but you have to ask him because I don't know what is behind his bipolar index. So this connection with bipolar disorder, this is all his thing. You have to ask him.
Mm-hmm. And second part, it's occasionally mentioned that especially in the Amazon that the shamans occasionally include deliriants such as datura into the brew to induce more hallucinations or something. Do you check for deliriants in your samples, and have you encountered deliriants there?
We found some with scopolamine, but not from Netherlands. This is from a plant called toe, the devil's trumpet, that contains scopolamine. So we were looking for this, and we found this, if I remember correctly, in some samples from Peru, but they were not part of this data set yet.
Thank you for the presentation. I did literature review on 5-MeO-DMT, and I was surprised to see that there is, in your results, I think the first chemical evidence of 5-MeO-DMT found in ayahuasca brew. So maybe that's worth pointing out. There was fatal case of a person who had in his blood both 5-MeO-DMT, DMT, and harmala alkaloids, and 5-MeO-DMT is pretty dangerous with MAO inhibitors. Which I'm just curious, which source was it? Which brew was it? Where did it come from that had 5-MeO-DMT as well?
This brew was that I analyzed here was made with chaliponga. I have to look up what the tribe, but those amounts were very low. The work you referred to was probably that article by Sklerov and others. What was about, the headline was about fatal ayahuasca fatal result of drinking brew with 5-MeO-DMT in ayahuasca, but it was contested because we actually didn't know if it was in ayahuasca or the person who consumed this brew consumed 5-MeO-DMT in some other form. And blood test results showed incredibly high concentration of 5-MeO-DMT, higher than the normal DMT, and it is stronger compound, so normal doses of this compound are lower. So in no normal ayahuasca made from the ayahuasca vine and chaliponga can this concentration of 5-MeO-DMT be so high as this cannot kill you. After this article, there was a discussion that we don't really know if it was in ayahuasca, if he added it into ayahuasca or consumed it separately, because there is no way how to make it sure. The consequence of this was ICEER's organization issued a warning against combining 5-MeO-DMT, for example, the bufotoad ceremonies with ayahuasca, recommending to have at least 24 hours before or after, that's between drinking ayahuasca and doing the bufo. So there is like belief or some data that combine, but as we know, the difference between medicine and poison is a gradual one, and it all depends on dosage. So there is no reason to be afraid that traditional Colombian yahe made with chaliponga could have dangerous amount of 5-MeO-DMT. It's practically traces it has.
Right. All right. Thank you once again, Helle.